So where did you all learn about dating and relationships?
I was pretending to be a girl so that I could talk to guys.
The rules that we've agreed upon that are in a lot of ways bullshit.
We're the sort of evolved people who actually want to have a relationship.
Literally, like, you will not be attracted to emotionally unavailable people if you're not on some level emotionally unavailable yourself.
US wants to be in an open relationship and wants this, and it's generally my belief that everybody wants to be loved.
No one talks about ghosting if you didn't like the person.
Yeah.
Everybody is judgmental. Like, when they said that dating apps mean that we're superficial now, we've been superficial forever. It's by
Are you one of
Put it
those people
out.
who like airdrops people's iPhones randomly?
He's the guy that like sits in the Starbucks.
Hi.
What's going on? You ready to talk about some modern dating?
Yes.
do it.
Question the rules a little bit. So where did you all learn about dating and relationships? Like maybe let's just start with you and Vienna. Tell us about where you learned about dating and relationships and what you learned.
I mean, relationships, I think the first one obviously is the family system. So for me personally, it was my parents who got separated when I was in first grade. And so witnessing and watching their experience as a couple, obviously very young for me, but seeing the divorce go through the separation, it took 9 years until they got actually divorced in the court system.
Wow.
What was it like going through and sort of seeing the deconstruction of a relationship between your parents over the course of 9 years? Like that's a long divorce cycle.
It's a long breakup.
I would imagine that it probably, yeah, that's a 9-year breakup. Like I can imagine that wasn't exactly easy. So what was your experience in like that and how did that shape you?
Well, so I wouldn't even say it's just 9 years. I mean, I think it goes and goes and goes, and there's still all of the pieces that get integrated and triggered even after the divorce gets signed, right? It doesn't just end there, especially when you share a child and your lives are overlapping. And so for me, I'm also an only child. And so being an only child in a divorced system in the way that I was, you know, I did start to play small in the sense that I didn't feel like I could take up a whole lot of space. There was a lot of emotion that showed up in different ways, whether it was anger or emotional reactivity or disorganized emotion.
So did you ever feel like you had to choose between one parent and another, and what was that like?
Absolutely. Some of that was implicit, some of it was explicit. There was a time where I distinctly remember being in the judge's quarters, and I think I was 9 or 10, somewhere around there. And I went in and the judge said, we're going to be recording this meeting, and both of your parents are going to get a recording of this.
Oh my gosh.
And then proceeded to ask me questions like, who do you like living with more? And so, you know, for me, obviously that question, I mean, I think anybody can feel that, and anybody who's watching is like, oh, like it's so painful. It's like, how does that system in place for a child to be, and to know that your parents are gonna get this? It's like, well, you know, they're both amazing, you know, and you just become this
There's some pluses and minuses
Totally.
to each.
There's just so much pleasing going on, and I became such a pleaser that everything was always okay. Both of their homes were amazing. Both of them were incredible. Everything was fine. I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. You know, there was so much volatility there. I didn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. And again, if I bring it back into what it was like for me dating and partnering with people, it was really hard to be able to step into, you know, whatever my truth is, or if I didn't like something, I was always okay with everything, right? Like I was totally the cool girl. And to be able to say, like, I don't like this, or that bothers me, or this isn't actually okay for me, was so challenging, so hard, because I was such a pleaser.
Yeah, I feel like that's an experience that so many people have when it comes to going through and seeing divorce like that. So Mark, maybe tell us a little bit about where you started to learn about modern dating and relationships specifically.
I think when I really started to pay attention to dating and like what I was doing, not even that consciously, is after I went through a big breakup. Then I was like, what I'm doing isn't working. And I think in that mode, I sort of started to believe or think that like deep connected relationships lead to pain. So then I went through more of I danced in a shorter term relationships for a little while.
Tell me a little bit about what happened in the breakup that caused you to pause and reflect on how you were showing up in relationships. Like,
Well, at that time, I mean, when I went to more of like seeking attention and affection through short-term relationships, that was just really a strategy to, I didn't want people to see that I was hurt and I didn't know what I was doing. And, you know, it's not like men are celebrated for seeking emotional support from other people. I felt safe talking to women about it. And it's not, I can't say it's my friend's fault, but I just didn't. It's not like I went to my soccer team room and was like, guys, I'm breaking up here. I'm really crushed.
Yeah.
You know?
Because what's the message? Like, what was the message that you were worried about receiving, going to your soccer team and saying like, hey, I feel just freaking crushed after this breakup?
Well, yeah, like no one in my soccer locker room or, you know, was saying like, man, I'm just crushing this monogamous relationship. It's really, you guys, I'm getting deeper in love every day. Like, that's not what we're talking about. It was more like, you know, stories about conquests or, so I think the fear was that they would see that I was like really hurt through this. And I think I just started to, I started to seek validation in what would be celebrated. So unconsciously though, I didn't know, you know, I think about being in college and like really, again, loving my partner, but when you're like hanging out with your buddies, you're not like, this is the most deeply connected I've ever been. Which I think now I have that you know, we have that conversation, but that certainly wasn't, that wasn't what I was doing then.
Yeah, that's fair. Zeke, what about you? Where did you learn about relationships?
AOL chat room.
Little
ASL.
MSA.
We didn't have
So
that
I
in
can
Canada.
remember being in fourth grade, fourth grade, and I used to, I was like one of the original trolls. My first online relationship was with this chat screen, and I still remember the name. It was Powder Gods 55 was the screen name, who I was in a relationship with, and my name was Jacqueline. And I was a 23-year-old, blue-eyed, blonde-haired white woman.
Interesting. And how long did that go on for?
I kept trolling him for at least like 2 years.
Interesting. How old were you?
I was in fourth grade.
Really? What was the appeal for you? What was the curiosity?
I felt a weird connection, but I didn't honestly know what I was doing, if that makes sense. Like I was in fourth grade and I'm just like trying to figure out. I'm discovering new words that I never had heard before. I'm seeing body parts, sexual positions, sex that I had never seen before. I mean, it was all pictures. Everybody's sending pictures. Now, of course, the internet's full of videos, but I mean, it was just, wow.
Yeah.
It was, I believe, my earliest reaction, but I do generally remember that point. I was only talking to men. I wasn't talking to women. You know, I wasn't going out being like, hey, I'm Zeke in the chat room, come through. You know, I was pretending to be a girl so that I could talk to guys.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. What do you feel like the connection was that you were looking for in that?
I don't know. We'll have to talk later.
Do you have a follow-up question for him?
Oh no, we'll talk after.
Yeah, interesting. So how did that end? Did you continue that on, or did you
No,
end up...
definitely. I'm no longer a troll. In fact, you know, I go on catfish and catch trolls for a living.
No longer Jacqueline.
Did Powder Keg 50? What was his name?
Powder
God.
Powder God. Did he find out?
No, honestly, I think
You're the one that got away.
I either
on him.
changed my screen name or maybe he went away. I don't remember how we exactly stopped talking, but there was no like bye or whatever. It was just end of communication.
I think a different version though of like not being able to obviously show up as yourself in a very distinct way, but sort of this idea of playing differently, playing small. Maybe my version of that was entirely different than yours, right? But like, how do I actually take up space as I am and feel comfortable and confident in that? Right? Like for me to be able to tell somebody, no, I don't like this, or this doesn't land for me, or like, I'm not okay with that, is maybe for you to be able to just be Zeke.
Yeah, I think it was really one of the honest first things of exploring homosexuality. It just, I didn't know that men could be with men. At that time, I knew, you know, obviously after seeing pictures sexually, the attraction, but it wasn't accepted in society, so to speak. And I guess that was really my first way of saying, well, I can, I guess, have my cake and eat it too, in a sense, as a kid. And then I just got hungry.
Yeah, yeah. Then there was like, okay, it's cake time. So what rules did you feel like you started to learn as you were kids when you started to date? Like when you were a teenager, what were sort of like the unspoken or spoken rules of teenage dating?
I think that it was, like, you used to have to call and ask permission to use the phone. Like I remember having to call at the time, you know, asking out girls, calling their house.
It was way harder.
Yeah,
like
it was.
People, kids, you know, they're kids
you wouldn't
today.
be terrified even to ask the girl first. You had to get past the roadblock, which was, hey, Miss Silverman, is so-and-so home?
Now you can like directly text the person. I think that's so
question
different.
about French homework.
Yeah.
You're needing a reason.
Right, yeah, math. I always needed help with math. That was my like
Oh, it's
in.
so good.
But that filter, though, it's still, taking away that filter to me is doing more harm than good. You know, you're not getting that respect factor. I mean, my mom even said the other day that she remembered when kids would just walk in and, you know, they'd shake the hand, they'd say hi, whatever. Now kids just walk into the house, you don't even know if they're there. Like, oh, Johnny's here. When did you get here? Who are you? Who are you, Johnny? Where'd you come from? I know a lot of parents who are having that issue. Like, how do I know who my kids are hanging out with? How do I know where my kids are going? I remember when I got my first car and I was able on my cell phone to talk to my friends. My mom didn't know where I was going.
Yeah, fair enough.
You know, like just driving around.
What do you feel like you guys learned from your parents about dating? Like what were some of the rules that they tried to enforce when you started to date?
Respect, for sure.
Yeah?
Like being considerate of the other person. I remember when I started dating after that breakup and I started to like, because I'd only been in 2 relationships, very long, like 1 2-year and 1.5 year. And I remember I'd like introduced my mom to 3 girls in like 3 months. And she stopped me and she's like, I raised you to have more respect than this. And I was like, I just introduced you to 3 people. You don't even know what's going on. Like, relax.
Moms know.
Yeah.
Moms just like always know.
Yeah, and I remember, I'll never forget that because I was like, whoa, okay. Again,
See,
hurting
but
though, so didn't
I
know.
had a similar experience with my mom about that, but this is later on in life. When I was introducing her to different guys I was dating or talking to, and I basically felt like I was getting accused of being a whore. And I'm like, no, these are important people in my life, just as you're an important person in my life, and I want you to meet them. To me, people forget that. You know, it's all so much who you having sex with, who you fucking, who you whatever. No, it's like, you're important. You're important. Let's talk about things. Let's whatever. We're not gonna sit there and talk about sex, are we? You know, but we're gonna have a meal together, get to know each other.
I think a lot of like, my mom grew up in Ireland with like nuns teaching her at school, you know, so
The
so
rules of nuns.
Sex was never even discussed, you know,
Abstinence.
so yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
which we know that works great. No, it doesn't, you know, I mean, it works great if you're not doing it, you're not gonna have a baby, but the math there, but it doesn't actually work to
Nature finds a way.
It finds a way.
Jeff Goldblum is in the room with us.
Well, I think what's interesting about that is if you don't teach about it, then people keep shame where that is, as opposed to like having an open dialogue that teaches sexual empowerment rather than fear of the conversation. As soon as you say that something's bad, like desire's bad, and you're a human being, you're gonna equate what is natural for you, that you're gonna have shame. You're gonna feel like something's wrong with you, which is, there's nothing wrong with it. It's just that if you're not taught how to be empowered with it and how to make good choices, it's gonna slip out. You're gonna hide in the halls of Craigslist, you know, versus like being outward and authentic. Which again, it's not always safe to be outward and authentic about your desires, which is again sort of goes back to the rules that we've agreed upon that are in a lot of ways bullshit.
Yeah.
I find the people who are most outwardly outspoken about principles and values are usually the ones hiding everything. You know, it always comes out later and we're all like, I knew it.
What do you feel like the rules were? Do you feel like the rules were different in the gay community, like growing up, like when you started to enter into that space than they were in the straight community?
Well, definitely different only because generally when you first enter into the gay community, so to speak, you're entering into a scene of, art and fun and party and alcohol and just everything that just looks like, oh, this is amazing, whatever. But you really have no idea what's going on as a child. Like, what is going on? I remember being in my first gay bar at 19, and I'm like, okay, so like, you guys are just happy and your lives are perfect and this is how it is. No, that's not how it is. There's a lot of negativity around, being gay, and there was homophobia, massive homophobia back then. Well, there still is today, so I don't know what I'm really talking about. But definitely, I had to explore things differently, and I feel that, when you grow up and you kind of start learning that you have strikes against you. Like I was growing up, I'm black, so okay, strike. I'm gay, strike. I'm good looking, kind of a strike.
Sometimes it works for you, sometimes it works against you.
It's like my chalkboard is adding up here.
It's like
what's happening?
You keep on just adding things that work for you, that don't work for you, that people perceive you in lenses and make opinions on you based on perceived biases and thoughts. But then you're still processing those things and have no idea what those things are as a child.
How I got introduced to sex was through an anatomy book. Like my parents actually bought me a human anatomy book, and there was a chapter about sex, but it was like
those drawings are never great.
It was horrible. It's like you kind of like see like the half body, right? And you see like the muscles of the penis and stuff like that, and you're like, I don't know how much I'm actually learning about sex with this.
Yeah,
sex ed is really taught to prevent pregnancy. It's like prevent teen pregnancy. That's right, but sex ed isn't really taught to how do you pleasure yourself, how do you pleasure your partner, how do you even avoid an assault, how do you talk about consent. It's not that conversation. It's really pretty much avoid pregnancy.
When it comes to questioning the rules about this, so like we think about, okay, parents sitting us down or teachers sitting us down or sex education, and we're going off of the story that these people can actually talk about sex.
Yeah, that they know.
Right? I think that that's part of questioning the rules, right? That's what this whole segment is about, is like, all right, so at a certain point, there's people either, okay, in the heterosexual space, we got a little more of a like textbook to show you what it looked like. But then you have parents telling you, and we're not, when we're kids, we're like, oh, the adults know, right? Like the adults know, the adults have the information, right? This is the information. And now when we work with adults, we work with, I work with couples, and I see the breakdown in conversation around sex. We have such a hard time communicating in general, then put sex into the mix, and we have a really hard time talking about it. And so if we're not questioning the rules around even people that we see as experts, right, people who are teaching us about this, and not questioning the lens through which they look, and there's so much that comes to sex. Like, is there unintegrated trauma that this person is then telling me what I should do with my body or how I should do something with that other person's body, right? Like there's so many layers to it, the wounds, the shame, the trauma, that's all unintegrated. And so if we're not questioning who's telling us and why they're telling us and how they're telling us, then we're building out a narrative about sex and dating and all of those pieces that might be flawed, and it certainly might not be for us.
Well, that's what's fascinating about relationships and dating is literally you should be dating and being in a relationship to explore, to be curious, to figure out what you want, what you don't want. But there's something sort of innate that in a sort of an unconscious narrative that when you're 25, you're just supposed to figure it out. Like you're just supposed to know, and so many people from, like, as you were saying, if people haven't even discovered their own relationship story, where they come from, and then they're teaching these stories, these thoughts, these processes from a very myopic lens,
Likely, yeah.
Yeah, and not to say for everything, but there's such a deconstruction of relationship, what's open now, what's tolerable, what's gender, what's sexuality. Like these conversations weren't happening, they're still struggling to happen, but they weren't happening 10 years ago, they weren't happening 20 years ago. They were happening in secret. Which again, if you have to put it in secret, then you're going to feel shame.
Which still baffles me today how, you know, the pornography industry is a $57 billion industry, but nobody watches porn.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so let's shift into some of your dating lives. All right, so you learn these things, you hear about these kind of rules growing up, you learn from parents, learn from sex ed loosely, and then there you are. You're out in the wilderness of dating. The wilderness of dating. What surprised you when you started to go into the dating world? Maybe we'll do like post-high school. What was challenging when you started to enter into the dating world?
I think my biggest challenge was pressure. I dated a playmate. I was always trying to date up, date the hottest, date the best, date the smartest. It was always like I have to now, you know, basically continue a legacy, and so to speak, you know. Yes, my dad being this Hall of Fame basketball player and having a beautiful wife and beautiful house, it was like perfect whatever, which nothing was perfect. But from the outside looking in, definitely perfection, and I definitely wanted to create that.
Yeah.
So then when I finally stopped saying, okay, stop dating girls, Joshua. Yes, they're fun to play with sometimes, but we love a good man, let's be honest. So when I finally started doing that, it was like, okay, now I need to realize not everybody likes me. Not everybody's into me. Not everybody responds well to me, whether that's personality or just, you know, looks.
And structure.
That to me was the hardest thing to know that I want you, but you don't give a shit about me.
Yeah.
Interesting. What about you?
I think it was that I wanted the appearance that I knew what I was doing, but I had really no idea what I was doing. Like in terms of, I know you said post-high school.
Yeah.
At that point, I was in a totally different meltdown. But I would say the dating meltdown came when like everybody else was dating and I still hadn't. And so I felt like I needed to get involved in this movement.
Was it dating or having sex?
Not having sex, just dating. I think I'd like kissed one girl in grade 9. I think my first French kiss was like in grade 11. So I was like a delayed, well, at least what appeared, maybe everyone was talking big shit.
Yeah.
And I was like, is it just me? Is everyone kissing each other? And I'm,
Well, I felt like there was like pride around that, right? Like being like one of the first guys to like start dating in my school. And then like there was like pride around that, you know? And so like to your point around performance, it was like a lot of like my validation and my identity started to come from this. It's like, oh, I am shit at academics because I was a horrible student because I had like ADD and couldn't pay attention. I was an average sports player, but I had gotten really good with women. And so that all of a sudden became this like big pillar of my identity. So I don't know if that resonates with you, but.
Yeah, I mean, that became, like when I was young, I was kind of chubby from like grade 5 to grade 8. And then I lost a ton of weight, not in a healthy way, basically starvation and exercising in that summer. And when I got back to school, girls were curious about me. But I was the same person as I was before that happened. And so I felt like all of a sudden I was getting some sort of reward for an external validation rather than, but I was in a way sort of like, I'm the same person, but you didn't care about me 2 months ago.
Yeah.
The only thing that changed is I lost weight. And so then it gave me body image issues that I think are just like a cyclical part of just understanding who I am and what matters to me. But for sure my validation started to then be, after I got heartbroken, about like, well, Mark's still getting girls, so he must be okay.
What happened in the heartbreak?
Well, I was lucky enough to have, when I say lucky enough, I almost have to tell the whole story, but I'm not going to.
Why?
I had a girlfriend who went away to school in the States for a soccer scholarship. And we agreed that we could see other people, which already, let me tell you, I didn't want to. So I'm already now a doormat. She came back to Canada with her friend and then another guy who was the running back from the football team. And so he wants to experience Canadian Thanksgiving. So he comes back. I'm sitting at Thanksgiving dinner.
With your family or hers?
With her family.
Okay.
And
He's at the dinner. And I'm like, I remember being like, there's something going on here. So it's just me, her, him, and her parents. And I'm like,
So
there, I
awkward.
feel like there's like three.
You get here.
Right. You get here when you don't have boundaries, when you're a nice guy.
Yeah.
When you're a doormat is a better term. And so it's sort of the only real visceral memory I have of that, other than that painful meal, is my vision is blurry and I'm like crying, and I'm saying to her at the door by myself with her, like, is this sort of, I think I said something like, is this how I find out? Or like, is this how you tell me? And that was when things really transitioned for me, is I really started to, I felt so betrayed, and I didn't trust myself anymore. I didn't really put together the pieces till far later, but it sort of changed the story of when I love people, they betray me, they hurt me, they lie to me. And being so committed to relationship, I was really wanting to build something, you know, like my parents had, I suppose, was like the ideal that I'd created.
Yeah.
I abandoned that. And I didn't know I did, you know?
Yeah.
Like I started to drink more, and again, like appear as if I'm fine, but inside I was devastated.
Yeah, I was on the other side of that. I was the guy that was like on the infidelity.
You were at
bandwagon.
dinner with the boyfriend.
Yeah. So I was, I was the other guy. I was the guy that learned the lessons through constant infidelities in my relationship. The one not being cheated on, but the one doing the infidelity consistently. And I just like looked back and realized like how much of my self-worth had come from relationships, from women, from sex specifically. And it just like led down the rabbit hole where, you know, I ended up, as you know, like sleeping out of the back of my car for like 3 weeks and just being in this space of complete isolation because I felt so much shame around not being able to control myself and like hurting people that I loved and cared about. And so it's just so interesting how there's always a different story on the other side.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, I look at, you know, because people would be like, I can't believe she did that.
Yeah.
You don't get to that dinner if you have good boundaries.
Yeah.
Like,
nobody gets to that
right,
table.
that table, they're having a great dinner with her parents, and I'm chilling somewhere else, maybe sad, but maybe not. But when you put the need to be in a relationship more important than to be connected to yourself, then that's where you end up. And I can look back and have compassion for even him, you know, and her. Like, I have no hate or anger towards it. I think what I have is a lot of sadness to the version of me I left there. The part who like loved unrelenting, but hadn't been taught boundaries.
Yeah.
You know, so I was like such an unboundaried lover.
Yeah.
But I needed also that balance of my masculine, of like someone who's actually gonna protect and curate the people who get access to my heart.
Yeah. Let's shift a little bit. As a couples, like as a marriage and family therapist, what are some of the most common complaints that you hear around dating and relationships
Yeah, I
today?
mean, I do work with a lot of people who are single in New York City, and but I would say that the commentary that I hear most of the time is just like, they're like, where are the sort of evolved people who actually want to have a relationship? I get that actually a lot from the gay community, right? That there's a lot of promiscuity and that there are plenty of people who actually really want a relationship. And they will say, like, I can't find somebody who actually wants to partner, truly partner, and have like long-lasting love and commitment and whatever that looks like for them. But that is a complaint that I hear from so many people. And, you know, maybe sort of the tagline of where are all the good men? And okay, like if I'm doing this work in therapy, which my clients are amazing and they're doing such beautiful work and they're evolving their lives and they're getting into integrity and they're setting great boundaries, but when they're doing it, they're losing. They're losing their pool, right? The pool becomes smaller. There are fewer people in that pool who are gonna level up in that space. And so they're not getting the second date, or they're not even wanting to go out again with this person. And so it just feels like there's this empty pool that they can't find people who actually wanna level up in the way that they are.
You have to get a chance to know somebody. You have to be in a situation where you can know somebody.
I'm with
get
you.
the same conversations from a lot of gay men who are like, you know, yeah, everybody was promiscuous, wants to be in an open relationship and wants this. And it's generally my belief that everybody wants to be loved.
Absolutely.
Nobody on earth wants to not be loved. Whether, you know, love is this scale, that scale. They want somebody who they can look at and say, I got you.
But they don't want to stop believing the story that they tell themselves that they're not worthy and deserving of love, right? Like up here, conceptually, I want love, I want partnership, I want connection, I want to feel that, but I'm not going to unpack the belief system that I have that blocks that, right? And that part is, I think, where so many people do wind up getting blocked.
I think of like, because when I think of, it doesn't matter what city I'm in, everybody has the same story of like, it's so hard to date in insert city they live in. You know, and that doesn't change. I think New Yorkers are often more outspoken about it.
Even though there's 9 million people.
Yeah, like you don't even have to be good at math. You could be bad at math and still come out with like a fairly high number. And that's where I think we need to get more clear on what we're looking for. Are we choosing towards what we're looking for? I do agree that we do need to give people a second date, a second chance, more time. And at the same time, a lot of people are over-entertaining people that they shouldn't. You know, a real good way of seeing that people are dating with different skill sets is that not, you know, one person doesn't get like the pool of eligible people on Tinder and the other one gets the pool of like, you know, ghosting people and, you know, quote unquote douchebags or whatever it is that some people end up in relationships with the same types of people all the time, and others don't.
Mark,
so that shows you.
It's the algorithm.
It's the algorithm, right? They keep dropping these.
Y'all know these algorithms. Wait a minute. How do I get in on these algorithms?
Well, I think it's an interesting point, like how, because what you're kind of talking about is like the dating app culture, right? And like how.
Well, even a coffee shop is like, you meet this person in a coffee shop, why do you get to 6 months from now where there were so many red flags, just like you could look at someone's dating profile and tell with a pretty high level of accuracy their value system. You could do that with Facebook, Instagram.
I don't know if you can tell their value system. And that's my problem is people judge people based on this little 15-second window of their best moments.
But people do
you know
that.
What I mean? Nobody's going on Instagram like,
yeah, that's
you go on
true.
Instagram like,
yeah, like they have all those filters.
All filters.
They have apps that add ads now.
I mean, that does tell you something about that individual, like the amount of time, and effort that they put into
even the amount of selfies. You know, like these are all decision heuristics, like things we use as shortcuts in order to make. Everybody is judgmental. Like when they said that dating apps mean that we're superficial now, we've been superficial forever. They just exaggerate our superficiality. Like when you're walking down the street, you're swiping left and right to people in your brain.
Yeah, you're like hot,
but our
not
most
hot.
important dating heuristic is our intuition, right? Like we're looking at all of these pieces, these judgments that we're making, whether they're aligned or whether they're far off, because I think it could probably go both ways with different situations. But one of the things that I think people struggle with the most, whether it's, because I know you would say it needs to be a hell yes.
On date one.
I know
because
you
6
would
years
say
down
that.
the road when a baby shits on you, nothing's a hell yes in that moment.
I think my point. I think my point though is that so many of us struggle with our relationship with our intuition.
Yeah.
And because we have abandoned ourselves and our gut over and over and over again, and because people along the way have negated experiences that we've had, whether it's observing something growing up and having your parent tell you, no, that's not what your father's doing, or something like that. You know, like we have so many experiences where people are stripping away at our intuition. And so we get to a point in our lives where we want to start dating and we want to base it off of like, what do I actually feel here, right? Because when people actually feel aligned, what do they talk about? The sensation that's in here, right? And so when we have stripped down our intuition over and over and over again, it's really hard to know whether it's a yes or a no. It's really hard to know what the motivation is behind the yes and behind the no. Am I doing this because I think that you're just like everybody else? Am I doing this because I want another free meal? Am I doing this because I'd rather be with someone, anybody, rather than being at home alone by myself?
Yeah.
You know, and so some of the work that I do is really trying to get people to reconnect to their intuition by going into all of the places, all of the moments, the ones that stand out to them, where they abandoned it, where they stepped away from themselves. And when they start to see that, then they have a chance at repairing that. And so when we think about like, how can I start actually choosing from a place of full knowingness, right, where it's behind me, whether it's a full knowingness that I do want to give this person another chance, even though the fireworks weren't necessarily going on day one. You know, like that I think is it's so important to know that distinction and to find a way back into the gut and into our intuition.
I do think that like the dating app culture has made it a little bit more challenging to trust that intuition, right? Because you're like, as you're saying, we have these decision heuristics.
sure.
Like we're looking at a really like brief glimpse of
Yeah.
someone,
Well-
and so dating apps have undeniably created a different set of challenges. So
Sure.
Ghosting specifically, right?
Ghosting.
So I think because what people will usually say about ghosting, no one talks about ghosting if you didn't like the person,
Yeah.
right? Like if you didn't have a thing with the person, no one calls it ghosting at all, right? So ghosting happens when you actually thought and felt and received feedback and data, right? Like from that other person that we were getting on, right? Like we liked each other, something was moving, we were gonna go on another date, then all of a sudden that person just falls off of the face of the earth. They put a date on the calendar maybe, and then you never hear from that person the 3 days leading up to it,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah, and that can happen after like 6 months for people. Yeah.
totally. And so when you think about going back to the conversation about intuition, it's like, well, the intuition was also supported by you communicating to me that you wanted to do this,
Yeah.
by you giving me data points and evidence that you were feeling what I was feeling and that you were into it with me, right? And so when you think about what happens to our intuition in that space and why it's so confusing to people, this goes for anybody who experiences it. Like that's why ghosting is so problematic, is that it's a constant recurring tear at intuition over and over and over again.
Maybe it's a challenge to it too, though, because I think of like, what is chemistry? Well, chemistry sometimes, if we think chemistry and gut feeling is drawing us to people who are unhealthy for us, then we know on some level our chemistry is disrupted, and we're probably coding chaos as chemistry.
That's right.
Which could come from our childhood, could come from a number of places. So I think if what we're following is what we mistake chemistry for intuition, right? Like this desire to want to be around chaos. And we might even look at someone's dating profile that looks calm, and then we code it as boring, even though it could love us.
I have 100% looked at people's dating profiles or talked to people and been like, I'm not ready for you because I'm still in my wild phase. I want to do whatever. You're like an executive and got an apartment
You
in a
wanna
high
settle
rise
down
and you But maybe they didn't. Maybe they don't. But I perceived immediately, I can't do that.
Well, that's why I think it's so important that we look at what are our biological responses versus what we actually want to create. And those, what you were saying before, like what story we have in our mind about the dating world and our own lovability and what we're worthy of. But literally, like, you will not be attracted to emotionally unavailable people if you're not on some level emotionally unavailable yourself. It is not sexy to people who are emotionally available when someone and I like the ghosting part, I would imagine, and this might sound insensitive, but for the sake of taking a grenade, I'm gonna say it, which is, I bet you there are so many red flags before the ghost most of the time. Not all the time, because there's some really good actors, or I think that's a universal term.
Yeah.
I don't know. When I get 4 straight pictures of your torso and then probably your ass, let's just be honest, and then all of a sudden you ghost, I feel away. And I didn't do anything about that.
But
I'm not
I would say
talking
even
about your
like
specific ass. I'm just saying, 4 pictures sent. What's up?
But does 4 pictures
And then I
sent
get
say
nothing.
like, oh, we're gonna be a thing? No, it
If
doesn't.
somebody sends you a picture of their ass, you better hope that something's gonna happen. You can get
No,
some
it's
kind of
usually done at a
response.
different time of year. It's by
Are
Christmas
you
tree.
one of
They're
those
putting it
people
out.
who like airdrops people's iPhones random pictures?
He's the guy that like sits in the Starbucks
All of a
and he's
sudden
like,
you're
you know
like,
what you need
whose
right
is
now?
this?
But I think that the distinction, in your community, right? Like, what does that mean? Right, like what is the message? What's the story that most people believe if they get 4 torso
pictures
photos
and a butt.
and
Yeah, if you get the pic, you generally believe you're sexually into me, we can have sex. Now, whether that actually happens is completely different, but we should be able to have that conversation about taking to the next level. But if you don't even get that chance,
But if you got ghosted by somebody who's just seeking sex, that would be the message I would imagine they're sending through.
too.
Yeah.
I get that, but
'Cause
it's
it's
not.
it's
That's
still
not. But
rejection
that's
is
not
still rejection.
unexpected.
That's right.
It's not unexpected. I'm not dismissing that it's still rejection, but it's not unexpected that someone who's seeking just sex ghost you. That's the whole, they're not like, hey, let me just caretake your heart.
It's true.
There's a whole reason
But
they're
at the
being
same time,
fleeting.
I still come from the mindset that everybody isn't just seeking sex.
That might be
my
fair.
own problem,
You might
maybe,
believe in the
but-
best in someone, which I think is beautiful. I do too. But it's someone is.
You're saying you can't
someone
change a
is
hoe?
You can change it. Anyone can change themselves. But the point is that someone is what they're choosing, not what they say they want to choose. They're what they're choosing.
Yeah.
And so the evidence in the 4 pictures for me is like, they're not seeking a relationship. They're seeking just sex. If they're just seeking sex, then, and you're disappointed that they ghosted on you.
Yeah.
I mean,
don't know.
to me, you could
Sometimes,
be disappointed.
if you have the asset to show it off, show it off.
I mean, send it out to
know what
a
I
group.
mean?
Just everyone.
Your,
Just post it on the
your
internet.
dick pic better look like Jesus Christ if you're gonna send it out, which some have. Others, they curve to the devil.
So, but there is like what we're really talking about is that there is sort of like this more dysfunctional part within online dating, right? And I think you've talked about this quite a bit, and you've been this open advocate around some of the dysfunction that can come from online dating and some of the challenges. And like we're talking about some things around, people ghosting after they sent 4 photos and
Yeah, we're definitely talking about very taboo issues, but I mean, at the same time, unfortunately, I was sexually assaulted at 27 from somebody who I met off of an app, who presented themselves in a great light, in a dating light, in a whatever, and we went on a date. Mm-hmm. And our first date, actually, we were texting for probably, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and just on the app, because I didn't give my phone number yet. And I finally invited him to actually just come to my recording studio because I was still weary. And at my recording studio, there were 7 other people there, including my cousin. And I'm like, okay, he passed that test. My cousin was like, oh, solid dude, whatever. So then the second date happens, and unfortunately I was drugged and then raped at my house. And for that to happen, and I don't blame the app, but what I blame is I didn't know him. Mm-hmm. And I got that validation of I know somebody because I had talked to them online for 2 weeks. And then we had, again, a 3-hour, 2-hour interaction that made me feel somewhat secure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I wasn't. But again, I do believe that there are more good people than bad people in this world, and predators are out there, and they do take advantage of people, and I definitely was taken advantage of. But you have to know on social media, you don't know these people.
No,
and you don't know these people like at all. At least me sitting here talking with you, I got some body language. I can, kind of read you, have an energy, I can tell, okay, I can do this and he's not gonna kill me, or, I can make a joke and he's gonna laugh. Online, if I send something funny, I don't know if they really thought it was funny.
Well, and you think about it too is the one thing about all social media and all social interaction that's online is there's no negative social feedback. Like the way that people act online, they would never generally act in person because they would get punched, they would get killed, they would get, but everyone's like powerful when they're behind their screen.
Keyboard warrior.
Yeah, there's some real outspoken.
Yeah, nobody just whips out their dick in the bar. Yeah. At least,
I mean,
at least not before 4 a.m.
Yeah. So, after that experience happened, Zeke, like, what did you change about your dating behavior, or did anything change?
Generally, to be honest, my dating behavior did not change. What changed to me was myself, and I want to make the clear distinction because I'm still on apps. I've still dated pretty much in the same circle, except, I've dated a bunch of different other people. I like to call myself, United Nations. I've dated pretty much every, whatever.
How generous of you.
I'm getting back.
It's all about equality. It's all about equality. Just spread it out. There you go.
But what changed in me was that exactly what you were saying. I learned to more so respect myself, respect my space, respect my time. And it's really the time part that was the big thing. Like, why am I going on these random dates or random whatever that I didn't really feel something, but I was just doing, I'm bored. Let's just go grab a drink.
Yeah.
I'm bored. And even to the point of me saying, I didn't really find this person that engaging. But I was new to Chicago, I didn't really know anybody, and this wasn't the kind of person who I felt, would fit into my general friend group. But again, I didn't know anybody, so I'm like, okay, let's see what happens.
And you should
that
be
got
free
me
to
into
be
trouble.
curious like that, in a world where that doesn't exist.
Yes, but I feel like, just like I said, with our general energy, I didn't really have that general whatever. Like, I feel like, we can go have a drink, do some bullshit, whatever. I didn't really feel that with him, but I still allowed myself to say, okay, let's tag along, see what happens.
So I think, we've talked about a few different topics in this area, and one of the big ones that I hear, especially in like the men's communities and groups and just like talking to guys and seeing the online conversations, is, how men are feeling post Me Too. And we definitely live in a Me Too, I don't know how you would call that, like a dating culture now. And it seems like more and more guys are struggling, right? I hear a lot of, men can't be men anymore when it comes to dating. We have a lot more women saying things like, where are all the good men? Why won't they just come and talk to me and approach me? What are some of the challenges that you hear men talking about nowadays in the dating world? And is it the same in the gay community?
For me, and post Me Too to me has become a monster without a home. Like monster without a closet, just kind of roaming around now. And the reason why I say that is I went public with my disclosure on Good Morning America a year before Me Too really skyrocketed. And that was taboo. That was something that we couldn't talk about. Male on male rape, it was unconscionable. And then Me Too came in December, and it was very powerful, but it left out men from the conversation. It even left out transgender people from the conversation. It was generally just white women standing up saying this happened, which was powerful. And it really morphed to me into a women's movement, because as you saw, the Oscars followed that, and the Golden Globes, and it's honestly become insanely powerful. But it started with just people disclosing horrible things that happened to them. And that is my main problem with Me Too, is that people feel that, okay, I said it. Okay, well, that's the first step. Now you got like 1,000 more to healing, and then you're gonna have to do 1,000 more just to maintain, and then you're gonna do 1,000 more when some other shit happens that reminds you of that shit that happened before.
Yeah.
It's like people don't realize the steps of that. So I think that Me Too misled people into saying, okay, I stood on my soapbox, now it's over. But the problem that I'm seeing in now dating post Me Too is a lot of straight men have said to me, do you know how many times I get hit up on Tinder of girls just wanting to fuck? Like the other way around. And that to me was like, that's not really my world, but I'm like, for real? And then, I see the pictures, I see the conversations. And that part has still not been talked about women wanting to have sex. That's okay.
Yeah.
Safe sex, healthy sex, hookup sex, whatever it is, that's still something that, to me, guys were like, I didn't realize that people talk like that women talk like that that was in the realm. For men, it's more so been, to me, around language, around, okay, when can I talk about sex? Like, when can we have the discussion? Like, if we're going to have sex and we're going to have the discussion, how far can we talk about it? Because literally, every time you have sex, we're all just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
We're all trying to figure out, okay, what do you like? What do you want to do? And yes, asking is not sexy. And you want to have a flow and you want to whatever, but you should establish some boundaries beforehand. We should know what you like. I don't just want to stick my thumb in your ass and you don't like it.
You gotta ask.
You gotta ask
You
about
can't
the
just
thumb.
do that.
It's true. What do you think?
I think there's a lot of conflicting messages that are challenging. I mean, from the online conversation I've observed happen too, in your community too, because I participate in your ManTalks community on Facebook, which has tons of conversation about it, and it's a safe space to have it. And so I think there's been a couple conflicting, like online I'll see messages like, where can I just find a man who'll throw me up against a wall and take me?
Yeah.
Well, that's a very counter Me Too message, which is, and the Me Too
But
message
is it? You know what I mean? Because Me Too has now put you in the bubble that we can only do consensual and do whatever. What's wrong with somebody saying, look, I just want to get banged tonight?
Totally, totally. No, the point I'm saying is that if you're a 12-year-old kid, a boy, and you're heterosexual, and you're seeing that message on a meme without context, and then you're seeing another message about consent, which is a beautiful message, but it, again,
Oh yeah, now
put
it's
in
messing you
it's
up.
conflicting,
Yeah.
who do I need to be and how do I need to show up? And so I think at least in my experience growing, I'm 40 now, so I grew up in the 80s and
Well, you
90s.
look great.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think growing up in sort of the post first and second wave feminism, there was, and my mom by all design a feminist, but not like, there was no man hating, so quote unquote. But there was a lot. I was afraid of being controlling, or like I would become like men in the media, which that was in the 80s and 90s. And so I had no boundaries because I was afraid of like standing up for myself. And it was fascinating when I needed boundaries when I was older, when I was at a Thanksgiving dinner that you only end up when you don't have any. Right. But when I actually needed them and when I actually found that saying, that's not okay the way you're being, no, that's fine, that's when a woman would finally be like, oh, like, thanks for showing up finally. There was respect for me because I didn't, again, I guess coming back to I didn't respect myself. I didn't love myself enough to stand in my truth. So I guess the conflicting messages I see are really those like two poles.
Yeah, that seems to be one of the biggest challenges. Is that, and it's coming from both men and women. Where you'll hear, like you're saying, the messages from some women who are like, oh, I just want to be thrown up against the wall, and then other women who are like, oh, I don't want that at all, and then which is totally fine. And then men, of course. I think a lot of us were like, well, just tell us what the answer is, right? We're just like, we just want to fix it.
Is there a way?
Yeah, we just want to fix
way?
it. So if there's like a formula, that we can sort of put this into, there's a lot of us, I see a lot of men searching for a sort of unanimous answer. And I think and even for myself, I've kind of been looking at this, and there's the consent conversation, there's the Me Too, and it's like, how do we find a unanimous answer? And so,
I think, and even when I go to Congress, which is just unhelpful in general, but when you speak, to people who are going to put laws and legislation around these things, around sexual assault, around rape, around sexual harassment, you have to define it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest problems when somebody says, well, my experience is this. Well, your experience to me doesn't really classify you as being raped. It might not even classify you as assault. That sounds more like harassment to me. But you can't take away my experience. That's my experience. That's what I felt. Yeah, but I can't really punish somebody based on your feelings. I can't really help you based on your feelings legislatively or in the law and criminal justice. So that's what a lot of men and a lot of people generally are struggling, because now we're able to talk about these feelings. We're able to express ourselves. But when you bring it back to our government civility system, where does it fit?
I don't think that there's an equation, like you're saying.
Yeah.
I think going back to our previous conversation, we talked a little bit about how hard it is for people to communicate about sex, right? That we talked about all these messages. And so most of this comes down to being able to ask for what you want, right? Not like you said, there are going to be some people who want to be thrown up against a wall, and then there's going to be some people who don't want that at all. And the way that we find out is whether we either ask or that person tells you directly. And sure, we can say like off of intuition, we should have like some sense, right? Like we can read some body language, we can read some energy, but based on this movement and based on all of this coming out and people actually talking about it, I think what a lot of it requires is a stronger, richer conversation, right? And that if I want this to happen, but I'm unwilling to ask for it, where does that leave me? If I want to be thrown up against the wall, but I don't want to say it, or I have shame around it, or I feel embarrassed to say this to somebody, what's that conversation? What's that work around that? Right? Like, yes, I think for a lot of women, it's like, guys, it's not, like when people are like, oh, I don't want to say that you're beautiful, I don't want to, and you're like, like, that's not it, you know? And I think sometimes that pendulum swings into such an extreme where you're like, you know what's appropriate. Like, there's a lot, you know what's weird, what's awkward, what's creepy to say. Like, if you're in your integrity, like, if you're like, you look beautiful today, nobody's gonna be like, fuck you.
Look beautiful.
Like, that's not it. When your tongue is hanging out the window of a cab and you're like hooting and hollering, like, that doesn't feel good, right? Like, so I think that there's some things that get swung into this extreme that are like, this is, please don't even bother us with that conversation of like, can I not even like, you know, and it's like, oh, come on, you have to have a little bit of that filter.
Usually
and
the
know
people
it.
asking that are so defensive of their like,
Well,
Sure.
I think it's like there are small, rare cases of that happening, right? Of a man being accused of sexual assault for touching a woman's arm and stuff like that. So I think, but the thing is that those are so minute.
Yes.
They're so small
Yes.
in comparison, right? It's like the number of women that have come forward about sexual assault or having been raped compared to the cases of false accusations. It's like tiny. Right, but sometimes
that's
it's
such a
easy
distraction
to
from
focus.
responsibility.
Yeah, sometimes it's easier to focus on those like one-off cases.
I think a lot of men will say like, you know, I still think though that this person wants me to be whatever this man is who can just throw you up against the wall, and that the sex appeal goes away if someone has to ask for it or communicate it, right? Like, I don't know if that's been in your community at all, but I've certainly heard that come up in conversation before, where it's like, well,
you want to recreate the best porn you've ever seen.
That's
just
generally
deliver
the pressure
pizza and
that a
have
lot
sex,
of men
isn't that
feel,
what-
right? It's like,
right, which is like the wrong pivot. You know, like trying to recreate that is impossible, and it's also not your sexual experience, right? Going back to the lens that through which other people give us the story. From the therapist perspective and in the therapy room, what I will say is that a lot of men specifically in my office have actually brought forward to me experiences where they look back in their lives and they are thinking about, when did I cross a line? You know, have I raped somebody? Have I sexually harassed somebody? Have I assaulted anybody? And having a space to be able to talk about that and then learn how to actually integrate that and what that looks like as you move forward, so that the shame and the shadow isn't something that is controlling the way that you're showing up in dating and how you're showing up in your sexual experiences. And so, you know, I think from that perspective, it's been really nice to have those conversations. And I so appreciate the people who are coming forward and saying, this is really hard for me to say to you. I'm sure it's hard with a woman sitting across from them. But I think I raped somebody, you know, when I was whatever age, or, you know, I think I absolutely have crossed the line multiple times, and I want to not have this in my shadow anymore, and to just move that and see, like, how do I move through life now and do this differently?
As a survivor, how do people in your sessions, like when somebody says, you know, I think I may have assaulted somebody, I think I may have raped somebody, how will they ever know without asking that person how they felt?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question.
And if that wound is opened up and it is that worst, that horrible moment, then what?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many layers to it. I think for some people, it's very obvious. They actually know that they have. For some who are, like you were saying with legislation, sort of knowing where does it go? Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because is this serving you? Is it serving that other person, right? Like, is it actually harmful to go back to that person and say, what was your experience? And I think that's an important part of therapy, is our work is never to do more harm, right, for anybody's experience. The work is always to be doing the healing. And you have to get very clear in that space of really sitting with it to think, is it going to be valuable for this other person?
So just to maybe start to wrap things up here, you know, one of the things that we touched on here really quickly was consent. And I think we'd be doing a disservice without sort of touching on that topic. So how have you talked about consent with your partners, past or present? And how do you think that we should be talking about consent? What does that actually look like? Because I think, you know, we've talked about these different areas, and like, you know, in different communities, that consent happens differently, right? Like in the BDSM community, they literally sit down with a checklist and it's like, what are all the things that you want to experience? What's a no-go? And it seems unsexy in some ways, but in other ways, it's like, look.
That's been the easiest times when I've had
it's like,
sex.
here's
When
all the
it's people
things.
who have fetishes and have specific things that they like, and they're very specific with them. I have tried to be that. But when I list the things that I'm into, it doesn't mean I'm into them right now. You know? So yeah, you know, I've had promiscuous sex, I've had group sex, I've done a lot of things. But that doesn't mean in this moment that that's what I want. And I think that that's what people struggle with, especially online, when it comes to consent. Well, you said it last week that you were into that. Well, right now, I just want to cuddle on my couch.
Well, that's a challenge, right? It's like knowing what we want in the moment.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking to that too, I think it would be a disservice not to name that when you are in partnership or in a marriage even. And I think a lot of times you'll hear people say, but I'm married to you. You know, that rape happens within marriage, right? That rape happens within long-term relationships. That rape, you know, like a lot of times we think about these things happening in these one-offs or you know, that there's like some other story around it that isn't about, you know, what does consent actually look like in a marriage, right? What does that actually look like? But I've married you. We've already agreed to do this. You know that I like you. You know that I want that. You know, it's like, wait a second, like like you said, I don't want this tonight. I might have wanted it last night or last week, but I might not want it tonight. And the assumption that I do is where some of that can sometimes go wrong. And so I just wanted to highlight that here because I don't think it's just in the dating world. I think it's in relationships where that consent is still something that needs to be a part of the conversation.
I think the research shows that, as Gottman's research shows that the response of a partner to a no is what determines whether that relationship continues to have a lot of sex. Is do they shame them or, you know, make them wrong for having a no versus like, oh, well, what else would you like to do tonight?
Yeah.
And then that partner feels safe to have the boundary.
Well, to just very quickly speak to that, I think it's a lot of the unspoken energy, right? That, especially in relationships.
Pouting.
Well, if there's a no and then it is met with some type of shame or let's just call it shame or guilt, right? That like a lot of times then people will move into that sexual space unwantingly.
Yeah, I'll do it for
right?
them.
Well, I don't want you to be upset. I don't want you to be hurt by this or, you know, like, and so we move into that space. And I'm not saying that's not consent. I'm just saying like there is a huge conversation to be aware of a lot of the unspoken energies and feelings that get triggered and reactive in that space. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know why when we think like consent isn't sexy, it can be sexy. It can be sexy if, you know, like chivalry isn't dead, you know, like that, like if the one thing you have to say is, does this feel good for you? Is this, you know, like, why wouldn't we have that?
You can get raunchy with consent too. Like, do you want to fuck? Like, you're like, let's do it.
I love that the therapist
Do you want
is like freaking that out.
But I mean, like, I think it is. There's this tagline around it that it's like, oh my God, consent is unsexy. Well, let's make a movement about sexy consent.
That's what I mean.
Like, let's,
why
you know,
can't
it doesn't.
Why can't it be like,
Mike and Molly
does this feel
make a
good,
porno.
You know?
Mike and Molly make a porno. Oh man. All right, so last question. What would you tell yourself about modern dating? What would you tell yourself about dating in your 20s? What would you go back and try and teach yourself?
Now.
Yeah.
I would try to teach myself. I said this quote this week. I said, "Don't skip your host phase because it'll come to bite you in the ass when you're married." So that's what I would tell myself. I would tell myself, you know, when you're ready to commit. When you're not, don't.
Honor it.
And don't play with the gray line. Don't whatever. You know, if it's meant to be, it will be. But it doesn't have to be right now.
That's good. Thank you.
I would say don't make the experiences of others more important than your own experience. I think I did that so much at the expense of my experience. And so I would love to tell her that it's okay, you know, for her to have her experience and take up space in that way.
I would tell my younger self to sit in the pain of loss, get to know it, and then rise from it, you know, learn from it, and then much like Vienna's saying, to honor myself, to like date with the truest intention, not to be afraid to ask for what I truly want, and to know that like, you know, this is someone else's quote, but the idea of like what is meant for you will never miss you, and what misses you is never meant for you. And that like draws such a serendipitous nature to dating where you're not attached to anything.
Yeah, yeah, that's so powerful. I would totally agree with that. I think like my biggest lesson has been that relational grief or relational pain can sometimes be the most therapeutic and strength building blocks of our lives, you know, because we really learn to meet ourselves. I've learned to meet myself more after relationship failures or breakups or infidelities than I think any other parts of my life. And it's just because people are always mirrors for us. And that's why dating is so incredible and also so frustrating and all of the things that we talked about here today. So thank you so much for joining me on Question the Rules. This was a really powerful conversation. Thank you for your stories. Thank you for your honesty. And thanks for your wisdom. That was just incredible, so thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. All right,
Cool.
give me a hug. I was loving watching this play.
I know.
I know.
So good.
It's just melting down.
Middle finger gone.